My name is Meredith Caldwell. I'm 67, and I've spent most of my life caring for others. I retired last year from my night shifts as a nurse in Chicago, finally able to breathe without the constant hum of hospital machines in my ears. Yet even in retirement, my thoughts circle around my family, my 2 grown sons, my granddaughter, and the hope that one day I might feel appreciated instead of overlooked. That morning, I stepped out of my modest apartment, the chill of Lake Michigan breezes biting at my cheeks, and stared up at the gleaming glass tower I had rented for the new year, a penthouse with sweeping views of the city skyline and the lake beyond, all carefully chosen for my family's first big reunion in years. My heart pounded with a mixture of pride and nervous anticipation. Months of saving, scrimping, and planning had led to this moment, and I dared to imagine the laughter echoing through the high-ceilinged living room. I carried my bags up in the elevator, feeling a thrill that I hadn't experienced in years. The city stretched beneath me like a glittering map of possibilities, and for a moment, I allowed myself to imagine everything perfect, my sons smiling, my granddaughter racing across the wide terrace, everyone together under one roof, happy and grateful. But even as I pushed open the penthouse door, a flicker of unease whispered at the edge of my mind. Would they notice? Would they appreciate it? Or would my efforts vanish in a flippant comment or careless joke? I shook the thought away, setting my bags down, and breathed deeply. The door clicked shut behind me, and the silence of the empty penthouse pressed in. I stepped toward the balcony, ready to greet the city with a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years, unaware that the first words I would hear from my daughter-in-law would change everything. I hadn't even set my bags down before I heard it, the voice that would slice through my excitement like a knife. DInL, my daughter-in-law, standing near the foyer with that effortless, practiced smirk, talking to my son, Mark, or maybe one of his friends. "Don't bring too many bags. The Queen didn't come here," she said, her words clear, deliberate, like they had been rehearsed. I froze mid-step, one hand on the balcony railing, the other clutching my coat. My chest tightened, and a hot sting of humiliation crawled up my throat. The city lights blurred beneath me as if the world had shifted, and suddenly I was seeing everything differently. I could hear her laugh softly, a cruel little melody, and Mark's chuckle in response. They weren't even looking my way. I lowered my eyes to the polished hardwood floor and gripped the edge of the railing, my fingers trembling. The penthouse, the sparkling skyline, the months of careful planning, all of it felt fragile, like it could shatter with the next sentence. How could words spoken so casually cut so deeply? For a moment, I questioned myself. Had I overstepped? Was this lavish gesture foolish? My pride wavered as I felt the sting of rejection in the place that should have been. Warmth. The room. The city. Even the air felt heavier. DInL's voice lingered, echoing in my ears. And I realized that this wasn't just a playful remark. It was the first indication that my family might never see me the way I had always seen them, as my heart. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady the pulse of anger and hurt. My vision swept across the empty apartment, imagining the laughter that should have filled it, the joy I had hoped for. Instead, an uneasy silence wrapped around me, and I knew the holiday I had dreamed of might become the very stage for the confrontation I never wanted to face, but could not ignore. I sank onto the edge of the sofa, still gripping my coat, and let my mind drift backward, through the decades of my life that had led to this very moment. The penthouse shimmered around me, but it felt almost unreal. I remembered the nights when I worked double shifts at the hospital, exhausted beyond measure, returning home to check homework, fix dinner, and soothe scraped knees. Those nights had been endless, but I never minded. This was what love demanded. Mark, my eldest, had been just a boy then. Wide-eyed and trusting, I had watched him grow, feeling both pride and exhaustion in equal measure. College tuition came next, and I scraped together every penny, selling my mother's old jewelry, clipping coupons, skipping luxuries, and even skipping meals when necessary. I counted every cent I could save from my modest nurse's salary to ensure that he could have every opportunity I never had. And then came the years for Nathan, my younger son. I juggled work, school pickups, and night shifts, nursing my own exhaustion while trying to be everything they needed: mother, father, nurse, cheerleader, confidant. I took pride in knowing my sacrifices would pay off, even when I felt invisible to the world outside our home. The Penthouse had been my latest effort, a culmination of those years' $85,000 I had saved painstakingly, month by month, from my retirement funds and small savings. I had imagined laughter echoing through the rooms, my sons teasing each other, Nathan chasing his daughter across the terrace, and the city lights flickering below like a promise of joy. But now, in the wake of DInL's words, all of it felt fragile, almost meaningless. Every late night, every skipped meal, every ounce of love and effort seemed to vanish under the weight of a single dismissive comment. My chest ached, not from physical exhaustion, but from the sting of realizing that the love I had poured into my family had not earned the respect or even the acknowledgement that I had hoped for. I pressed my hands into my lap, feeling the pulse of old sacrifices and the rawness of new hurt, and I understood, with sudden clarity, that this holiday might not be about celebration at all, but about confronting how invisible I had become to those I loved most. The Penthouse should have felt alive with excitement, but instead, it seemed hollow. I carried a tray of drinks into the living room, hoping to spark conversation, maybe a laugh, anything to feel included. DInL barely glanced at me, her attention absorbed by her phone, scrolling with that calm, effortless superiority I had come to dread. Mark lounged on the sofa, half watching a sports highlight, nodding absently at DInL's comments. I set the tray down and tried to join in their chatter, offering a comment about the view, the lake glimmering in the early evening light. A polite nod from Mark, a distracted smile from DInL, and then silence. It was as if my presence had been reduced to background noise, invisible unless they needed something. The warmth I had envisioned for this holiday dissolved into an ache I hadn't expected to feel in a place I had so carefully chosen. Every small slight stacked on top of the next. DInL critiqued the arrangement of pillows as she passed by. Mark made a dry joke that landed on my shoulders like a subtle jab. Even little remarks about my wardrobe or my posture carried weight. Tiny daggers disguised as casual observations. Each one compounded the sting of DInL's earlier words, eroding my confidence and sense of belonging. I retreated to the balcony for a moment, letting the cold wind hit my cheeks. Chicago's skyline stretched below me, glittering and indifferent, and I realized with a sinking heart how easily I had become a stranger in my own life. A mother, a grandmother, a woman who had given everything, now overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. I pressed my hands against the railing, my knuckles whitening. Something inside me shifted pain twisting into anger, invisibility hardening into resolve. I had been ignored for too long, and I would not remain invisible any longer. I was gathering glasses from the counter when I noticed Mark's phone left carelessly on the kitchen island. My fingers itched to ignore it, to respect privacy like I had always taught my children. But something in me, the unease that had been gnawing at my chest all afternoon, pushed me closer. The screen lit up as I picked it up, and I froze. Notifications. Messages. One from DInL, another from Mark. I tapped the first WhatsApp bubble, and my stomach dropped. DInL's voice typed across the screen, like a blade. Mom's been saving every penny for this trip. Let's make sure she covers everything. She won't know what hit her. My eyes darted to the next message. Mark replied, casually, almost cheerfully. Perfect? She's always been generous. Let's keep it that way. I sank into a chair, hands trembling. Every careful calculation, every dollar saved from my pension, every moment I had sacrificed for their happiness, they were treating it like a game, a puzzle to manipulate. Another message scrolled by DInL, plotting with her sister to convince me to sell my house, to funnel my life savings into their plans for a new apartment. My vision blurred with disbelief. My chest tightened. Could this be real? The warmth I had imagined in this penthouse, the laughter I had hoped to hear, all of it felt hollow now. They had planned this behind my back. Plotting, laughing, scheming. While I had believed I was giving them joy, my heart raced, a mix of fear, fury, and heartbreak. I set the phone down, but couldn't look away. I read again, Mark even lied to my younger son, Daniel, in Spain, fabricating an emergency to extract money from him. My own children, colluding to manipulate and deceive, treating me not as their mother, but as a resource to be used. The betrayal cut deeper than any word DInL had spoken in the living room. This was deliberate, premeditated. The anger swelled inside me, mingling with a sharp clarity I hadn't felt in years. I understood now that no simple confrontation would suffice. I needed a plan, something measured, precise, and unassailable. I took a deep breath and stood, pressing my palms to the counter. The city lights sparkled outside the windows, indifferent to the storm inside the penthouse. I would not let them take from me what I had earned, nor let their deceit tarnish the bond I still held with Daniel or my granddaughter. I would act, but carefully. Every step would be deliberate, every move counted. I sat at the penthouse dining table, the glow of the city spilling across the floor, my hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee. My mind raced, replaying the messages. DInL's laughter, Mark's complicity. The betrayal burned inside me, but alongside it, a sense of clarity began to rise. Anger alone wouldn't protect me, wouldn't safeguard what mattered most, my granddaughter, my own dignity, and the life I had built. I reached for my phone and called my lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, a steady presence I had trusted for years. I need to make changes, I said, my voice firm, measured. My will. My finances, I need to secure my granddaughter's future. And I need advice on dealing with my family. He listened, calm and precise, and within minutes, we began outlining a plan over the next hour. I drafted documents, signed papers, and instructed him to establish a trust for my granddaughter, ensuring the money I had saved for decades would remain untouchable. My pension, my savings, the penthouse. I moved everything into arrangements that my children could no longer manipulate. As I worked, a strange sense of empowerment settled over me. Every signature, every carefully chosen word in the legal documents was a step back toward control, toward justice I had long been denied. I mapped out the confrontation I would orchestrate, deliberate, undeniable, leaving no room for deceit. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I felt a quiet confidence replacing the knot of fear and helplessness that had coiled in my chest. The penthouse, the city lights, the quiet hum of Chicago below me, all of it felt like a stage where I could finally reclaim my place. Not as a passive victim, but as a woman fully aware of her power. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of my planning settle. The storm of deceit had been revealed, and now every action I took would be deliberate, measured, and unstoppable. The next morning, the penthouse buzzed with the casual energy of a family settling in, and I moved among them like a ghost. I smiled politely as DInL suggested rearranging the living room furniture, nodding to her ideas while secretly noting every detail, every glance, every phrase, every calculated gesture went into my memory. I poured orange juice, adjusted the cushions, and offered to fetch coffee, all the while pretending to be absorbed in their comfort rather than my own growing plan. Mark complained that the blinds were crooked. DInL corrected him with a thinly veiled laugh. I chuckled quietly, hiding the pulse of anger and the sharp awareness that I was recording everything. My phone, tucked into my coat pocket, captured their words' mockery, condescension, the casual dismissal of my presence. Every exchange built a clear picture of their strategy, their lies, their assumptions that I would remain passive. I excused myself to the kitchen under the pretense of making snacks, but the quiet space allowed me to review notes I had taken overnight, compiling evidence of manipulated conversations and financial deceit. I cross-referenced dates, text messages, and receipts I had gathered earlier, and a small, satisfied smile tugged at the corner of my lips. They had underestimated me, as they always had, and that would be their undoing. When DInL peeked in, offering instructions about the table setting, I nodded and obeyed, all the while letting her believe I was compliant. My movements were deliberate, measured, calculated to avoid suspicion. Each act of seeming obedience strengthened the trap I was weaving, a trap built on patience, precision, and observation. By the afternoon, I had collected enough to leave no room for argument or denial. The penthouse, filled with laughter and chatter, masked the tension in my chest. To them, I was still the accommodating mother-in-law, polite and unassuming. In reality, I was preparing the confrontation that would expose every deceit, every lie, and every act of manipulation. The calm, ordinary motions of the day were my shield and my strategy. I leaned against the counter, letting my eyes follow the city skyline, and allowed myself a single thought: soon, the truth would come to light, and the world I had quietly endured would shift entirely in my hands. By evening, the penthouse was alive with the hum of casual conversation, the clink of glasses, and DInL's constant, sharp-edged commentary. I moved deliberately, serving snacks and pouring drinks, but inside, my pulse thrummed with purpose. Every word, every gesture had been anticipated, and every action now brought me closer to the moment I had been planning since discovering their betrayal. I placed my laptop on the coffee table, connecting it to the penthouse's speakers while pretending to check messages on my phone. "Everyone, I have something to share," I said softly, my voice calm, measured, almost ordinary. DInL glanced at me with that same condescending smile. Mark rolled his eyes. They believed nothing could surprise them. I pressed play. DInL's mocking voice filled the room. "Don't bring too many bags. The queen didn't come here." Laughter followed, and Mark's accomplice chuckle trailed after her words. I let it sit, the sound of their scorn echoing off the high ceilings, before moving to the next recording, a thread of messages, each one revealing the lies, the manipulations, the financial schemes they had plotted behind my back, faces drained of color. DInL froze mid-step, her hand hovering over a glass. Mark's jaw tightened, eyes wide, disbelief mingling with fear. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I let the evidence speak, each message and recording a hammer, striking the foundation of their casual assumptions. When the final audio ended, I calmly reached for the stack of papers I had signed with Mr. Whitaker, the rewritten will, the trust for my granddaughter, and the bank instructions canceling their access to my cards. From now on, I said, placing each document on the table, the money, the penthouse, and my savings are protected. Valentina's future is secure. No one will touch it without consequences. DInL tried to speak, to protest, but Mark stepped back, silenced. The realization hit them fully, every move they had counted on. Every manipulation, every lie had been anticipated, recorded, and neutralized. Their eyes flicked between the documents, the laptop, and me. I saw fear, disbelief, and, finally, the quiet acknowledgement of the truth they had refused to see before. I exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift from my chest. Years of being overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated had culminated in this moment. The penthouse no longer felt like a battleground, but a stage for justice, my dignity restored, my granddaughter's future secured, and my control reaffirmed. I looked at them, calm but unyielding, and for the first time in years, I felt the full measure of my own power, the laughter, the dismissals, the betrayal. They no longer had dominion over me. Every sacrifice, every hour of work, every moment of patience had led here, and the truth was finally undeniable. The next morning, the penthouse felt different. The city skyline sparkled beneath a pale winter sun, but I barely noticed it. My focus was on Valentina, her small hand wrapped in mine as we packed our bags. She carried her favorite doll, unaware of the storm of deceit and triumph that had filled the rooms just hours before. I glanced around the apartment one last time. DInL and Mark were already awake, their expressions subdued, shadows of disbelief still lingering on their faces. They had been confronted with their own duplicity, and for the first time, they understood that my patience, my love, and my sacrifices were not infinite. The documents on the coffee table, the recordings, the locked accounts, they were reminders of boundaries they had crossed. And now, the rules had changed. As we stepped into the elevator, Valentina chattered happily about the city lights below and the adventures we would have. Her innocence was a balm to the ache of years spent giving, forgiving, and hoping for recognition. I realized that her laughter, her trust, and her future were worth more than any resentment or confrontation. Outside, the crisp Chicago air greeted us. I drew a deep breath, feeling it fill not just my lungs, but the spaces inside me that had long been crowded with frustration, disappointment, and hurt. Each step away from the penthouse was a step into a life reclaimed, a life defined not by the manipulation of others, but by my own choices and principles. I paused on the sidewalk and looked back at the building, its reflective glass catching the light like a mirror. It had been a stage, a battlefield, and finally, a place of resolution. I felt a surge of gratitude, not for their understanding, not for their apology, but for the strength I had discovered in myself. Valentina tugged at my hand, her eyes bright with excitement. "Grandma, where are we going first?" she asked. I smiled, squeezing her hand. "Somewhere wonderful. Just you and me," I replied, feeling a sense of liberation that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with freedom. As we walked away, the city humming around us, I knew that boundaries had been set, dignity had been restored, and the chapters of my life controlled by others had finally closed. For the first time in decades, I was truly free.